Welcome back to TruthCraft, a channel devoted to pursuing the truth while playing Minecraft. In this video, I want to talk about the most hated argument for God's existence, and that is the argument from intelligent design. Now, it's hard to tell what is the most hated argument for God's existence because, to be honest, people hate pretty much all of them. But what's interesting to me is that this is actually a very scientific argument based on scientific facts and reason. It's one that atheists, I think, should prefer to other arguments, ones that I've already addressed, such as the cosmological argument or the ontological argument. But in fact, atheists and others react very strongly against this argument in many ways. If you look up, for example, on Google intelligent design, you'll see that the first thing that pops up is the Wikipedia page, which says that intelligent design is a pseudo-scientific argument for the existence of God. So there you go. You have the Wikipedia article, which of course we all know is equated with truth, telling us that intelligent design is pseudo-science. In addition, I've heard people like Richard Dawkins state that peer-reviewed journals would really never want to publish articles by the proponents of intelligent design because it's just simply not good science. But let's think about intelligent design for a little bit today, and by the end of the video, I want you to decide whether you think it's reasonable or not, some of the hypotheses that they are putting forward based upon science and reason. What I think is that intelligent design is actually the most logical and the most simple explanation for the origin of not only human life, but the whole universe that we see around us, and I'm going to give you a few reasons why. Now, oftentimes, the argument from intelligent design is associated with William Paley. Paley was an 18th century philosopher, natural scientist, and clergyman. But the argument itself is pretty intuitive, as I mentioned, and in principle, it has existed for all of recorded human history. I mean, any human being who looks at the world around them and says, wow, it seems like an intelligence has designed all of this and not random chance. That's basically the presupposition that intelligent designers start with, or end up coming to. Now, the basic premise of the argument from intelligent design is that design in nature indicates a designer. Pretty simple. Now, we all know there are examples of design in the universe and in nature. Complexity, for example, order, purposefulness, and the functionality of living organisms. All these things indicate design. And often what happens is proponents of intelligent design will make analogies from things known in the universe to things designed by humans in order to demonstrate that the things designed by humans are oftentimes much more simple than the things that we see that appear designed in the universe. And of course, the things that are designed by humans, we understand intuitively to be designed because of their order and the way they fit together and serve a particular purpose. So consider a comparison between a telescope and an eye, for example. A telescope is a man-made device used to gather light from the night sky. The way it does this is by using a mirror to concentrate that light so that the lights appear closer to those looking in the telescope. An eye, on the other hand, is far more complex than a telescope. Light first enters the cornea, which bends the light, and then following this, the light passes through liquid called the aqueous humor. The pupil then adjusts its size depending on the intensity of the light using the muscles that make up the iris. There is then a lens behind the pupil through which the light passes onto the retina. During this process, the light is bent again. The light then reaches the retina, which contains sensitive nerves called photoreceptors, and these transform the light into electrical impulses, which then transmit visual images to the brain. Now, the argument from design would say that, while the design of the telescope leads us to assume that it must have been made by a rational mind or a designer, the far more complicated design should lead us to assume that there is a designer for it as well. Now, based on scientific principles, such as the second law of thermodynamics, order cannot come from chaos. Order can only come from a concerted attempt to make order out of chaos. So the functionality of the eye, the fact that it works at all, implies strongly that there must have been a rational mind behind it rather than pure chance. This is just one example of virtually infinite that could be given. Now, one thing to address is this question of irreducible complexity. Maybe you've heard that term before. And I think this actually adds another layer of importance to this notion of intelligent design. Richard Dawkins has stated in the past that what irreducible complexity is essentially the belief that something is so complex it could not have possibly been designed by evolution. But that's actually not at all what irreducible complexity is. Irreducible complexity is the notion that many things we can observe in the natural world are complex to the point that if something is taken away from them, they no longer have any functionality. So, in other words, take the human eye. If you take away certain aspects of the human eye, it's still complex, but it doesn't actually serve its purpose. It doesn't work as an eye. In other words, you can't get to the human eye by slow, tiny increments of evolution. And why is that the case? Well, the individual parts by themselves are pretty much useless. But the eye, when put together, even at all its complexity, is extremely useful and functional. So the idea that an eye or other very complex things we see in the world could have evolved by slow processes is really thrown into doubt by the idea of irreducible complexity. For more on this, I would recommend Michael Behe's book Darwin's Black Box. Now, another aspect of intelligent design is fine-tuning. The fine-tuning of the universe is the notion that everything in the universe, from the largest galaxies to the smallest particles, is determined by particular numbers. Now, these numbers are essentially mathematical equations that determine how everything will work and how it will fit together. However, these numbers are dialed, so to speak, to a very precise value, a value within which life is possible. But even tiny changes to these numbers mean that life would be impossible throughout the whole universe. Now, to understand just how tiny the range is within which life is possible, one philosopher asks us to consider a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. That's 1 with 60 zeros behind it. If the gravitational constant was out of tune just one of these increments, no stars, and therefore no planets, and therefore no life could exist. Now, there are many, many such examples of fine-tuning in the universe. Atheists such as Christopher Hitchens have said that the fine-tuning argument is the most compelling argument for theism. And this is because it is genuinely difficult to explain from an atheistic perspective. How is it that we landed up in a universe that supports life, even though the chances of doing so are so small that they might as well be impossible? Even though there are many more arguments from proponents of intelligent design, I just want to address one more in this video, and that is the idea of language in the universe. Now, there are many examples of language coded into the natural universe, but one of the most clear ones that we have is our DNA. The DNA in our cells is basically code made up of amino acids. It's a type of language. It's information telling the cell what to do. Now, if there's one thing we know about information, it's that it comes from an intelligent mind. For example, if you saw smoke signals, or if you found a written letter, or an exquisitely designed video game, would you automatically assume a designer? I think you most certainly would. How much more if you find an exquisitely designed human being, or the world around you see as encoded with information? Information much like what we find in computer programming and other types of languages. How much more then would you assume that there is a designer to this world as well? So after hearing these arguments for intelligent design, can we really think that this is automatically a pseudoscience? Is the idea that design requires a designer so crazy? I think not. I think the idea that design requires a designer is in fact the most intuitive idea. David Gelernter, a professor of computer science at Yale, has said that, in fact, this is the most likely explanation for why we see information in the universe around us. Even though he himself is not sure about intelligent design, he thinks that it is the most intuitive explanation. And I think a lot of us share that same intuition. So if you're interested in learning more about intelligent design, I would highly recommend Stephen Meyer and the Discovery Institute. They're putting out all kinds of good resources on this from a scientific perspective. Thanks so much for watching to the end of this video. If you liked it, why don't you give it a like and subscribe to my channel so you can see more content like this, pursuing the truth. And I hope to see you next time.